Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Magical Journey Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Ian Cahoon, and tonight we have a really great episode for you. I am excited about tonight, but before we get started with that, there's a couple of things I want to do. First of all, I want to encourage you guys to go visit Mystical Mountain Creation, which is responsible for creating this cute little cup that I keep hydrated with. And I appreciate that, guys. Thank you. Makes my water taste so much better. Okay. The other thing, magicaljourneypodcast.com is your thing, all things Magical Journey. That's your one-stop spot. Spot for that. Tongue-tied tonight. Okay. You can also get your magical merch there, which is the sponsor of this show. So please check that out. Always remember that we have everything you need there. Okay. So my guest tonight, we had on episode 88 recently, and I couldn't wait to get back. So we have her back tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, Katie Paige.
Hi, Daniel. Hello, everybody out there. Happy Friday night.
Happy Friday night. Before I get too much further, I want to thank the mod team too for the extremely good jobs that they're doing tonight already. Katie, really quickly, introduce yourself to people that may not know who you are and tell us a little bit about, you've got two.
One book that I authored myself, and then I co-authored the Snippy book, which on episode 88, we talked a lot about the Snippy case. But for me, this has been, like so many out there, a lifelong journey. You know, I had a paranormal kind of childhood going on, and just kind of thought it was fairly normal, and most people were living that kind of life. And then, as so many do, I got married and raised a family and worked and all that stuff. And then later on, probably in my early mid-40s, started really asking questions like, what the heck was all that on the ranch of my childhood? My mom dated the gentleman that owned the ranch, the Rocky Mountain Ranch. It predates the Skinwalker Ranch. And so I was watching, I think when we kind of get on this path, this kind of paranormal path, hi, Pamela, this paranormal path, I at least consumed a lot of books and documentaries and radio shows and everything like that, coast to coast. And I, along the way, heard about MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and that was a great starting point for me. I came in, it was 2014, I believe, right in as a field investigator, worked my way up to state director, got on some special assignment teams and things like that. And during the time I was with MUFON and just getting my feet wet investigating cases, I found, and this was before the show Hunt for the Skinwalker, I was at a Barnes and Noble bookstore, and I came across, I'm like, oh, this is about a ranch. And I started reading the back. I'm like, wow, this sounds a lot like the ranch of my childhood in Colorado. And started reading, there's a chapter in here called Other Hot Spots, and started reading about a ranch in Colorado. And at the time, I never knew, or my family or my sister, nobody knew anybody knew anything about the ranch. I never knew it was reported or investigated or anything. In fact, we were threatened and were never to talk about it. So in this book, it mentions the 3 PhDs that investigated the case, along with APRO, the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, and Dr. Leo Sprinkle. That was the subject of my first book, because what ended up happening, Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who is a psychologist out of Laramie, Wyoming, and a pioneer in the field of hypnosis. He hypnotized a lot of people, worked with a lot of experiencers. Well, he not only investigated Snippy, but he also was one of the investigators at Rocky Mountain Ranch, which in folklore was known as the Clearview Ranch. And John Schuessler, one of the founding fathers of MUFON, knew about this ranch and then learned of my connection and quickly gave me the briefing document. And from there, it's just it's been nonstop ever since for me. Just, you know how that goes, Daniel. You start with kind of with the high strangeness areas in particular, you're dealing with a lot. And there were things I didn't touch at first. I didn't want to look at cryptids. I really wasn't a believer in that at the beginning. It took me several years of going, oh my gosh, this is just as big and huge as the UFO phenomena. And same with the cattle mutilations. That was terrifying. And it's been going on for decades with no clear answer. So I kind of avoided that. And I kind of stuck to the nuts and bolts UFOs for my beginnings, you know, and that led into orbs and fairy lights and cryptids and everything. So it's just it's all of it, you know.
So when you talk about the orbs, have you experienced what some people call the twinkle lights?
Yeah, it's interesting. A good friend of mine, she was the paranormal specialist at the Stanley Hotel for a while. And I was lucky enough to go do a few of the ghost hunter events. So got to meet Amy and Grant and Jason and Steve and Tango. You know, they did some events out there at the Stanley. And I flew to Florida and did the St. Augustine Lighthouse event at the St. Augustine Lighthouse, because one of my favorite early episodes of Ghost Hunters, I don't know if you've seen it, but they're at the St. Augustine Lighthouse and you see that shadow on the rail, and then you see the thing peek down, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get out there. So me and my son and my niece and her husband flew out there and did that event. And I have to say, there's people in this field that you can just feel their energy and essence. Like these are people I'd hang out with, and sure enough, they were all just super nice, super cool people. But one of my good friends at the Stanley Hotel, she was like, you know, telling me about these fairy lights or twinkle lights. She called them fairy lights. And the half of my brain is skeptical. So I'm like, oh, come on. You know, I don't believe in fairies, you know, and all that stuff. But there's a haunted cemetery up here. And not only that, but when we were at the Stanley Hotel, we were sitting there looking in the carriage house out there where a woman had passed away. She froze to death out there. So the carriage house is pretty haunted. And sure enough, I feel like they're like energy balls is what I feel they are. I mean, they're not insects. We don't have fireflies here in Colorado anyway. But they're just these balls of light. So I just think they're high energy balls is what and I've seen them out with Trey Hudson. I've been able to work with his team out there at the Meadows a couple times. And Kristen and I, so there's the Meadows, and then they have Field of Nightmares and Field of Dreams. And Kristen and I were investigating the Field of Dreams. And we were seeing these twinkle lights, these fairy lights, and very clearly. And at one time, actually, it was maybe 4 feet up from the tree, and this light kind of did this, and that got big. So we were on the radios like, guys, you need to get the equipment out here, because one thing about Trey's team is they're really good with trying to capture evidence with their equipment. So they come on down. We caught some tail ends of it, but the next morning, Kristen and I was like convinced there must be like tin cans or nails or something reflective in the forest, or maybe a flight, like, you know, a flight path beyond the tree line or something. We checked all these things and hiked up there in the day. There was nothing. It was not firefly season. So we ruled all that out. So yes, I've had my share of these fairy lights that I've observed, you know, both indoor and outdoor, which is interesting too.
Wow. Yeah. The reason I was asking is because I know when we've talked about high strangeness, when I've talked about high strangeness with other people, they bring up the fairy lights, they bring up the blue orbs a lot. There's just a lot of interesting things that you've experienced that parallel with other things that other people are saying. And I want to try to I guess, connect these things together in the different areas. Like you mentioned, Trey Hudson and the Meadows Project. Trey has had some mind-blowing experiences there.
Yes.
Not unlike, I mean, you've had some pretty crazy stuff going on. So let's talk a little bit about what was the early experiences that you had there at the ranch.
Yeah, so just a little background, because even though I feel like I've told this a lot of times now through the years. I have to remember there's people out there that really don't know the background story. So long story short, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but that's okay. I feel I'm doing good for my age. But we moved to Colorado in 1970. I had a lot of trauma in my life. And I say that because I feel that might play a role into why it connects to certain people and more so than others. And we'll get into that later. But 1973, my mom meets a gentleman at her work. She was a computer operator for United Airlines, and she worked in the Denver Tech Center. She meets a gentleman, and he was supposedly getting divorced from his wife. So it's a weird dynamic. And that's how I know when I read the report, I'm like, yep, this is the family, because he was dating a woman. And what's interesting about that, the woman he was supposedly going to get divorced from, which they never ended up getting divorced, which is also kind of important because her boyfriend at the time came from San Francisco and said he was part of the Air Defense Command. And I believe there was some MK Ultra, and we have documents stating why we know there were soldiers on the ranch and other things like this. So we'll get into that too. So it was a really weird dynamic. So my mom's dating this gentleman, the three of them, so him and his wife that he was separated from and the boyfriend, pooled their money to buy the 60-acre ranch in Elbert County, Colorado. And one of the very first things that was experienced there were these strange hum sounds and bangs underground. It was a very low tone. I mean, I can hear it almost like and sometimes it would get so loud at the ranch, you couldn't talk over it. And it almost seems like anytime these hums would come, other strange things would happen. So that couple, my mom's boyfriend, they had 3 sons. The 2 youngest sons lived with us during the week because we're in the district for the biggest school district in Colorado, which was Cherry Creek School District. It's a really good school district out here. And they wanted their boys to have more opportunities instead of their little Elbert County town high school in Kiowa, which was like a graduating class of 7 or something, right? So the oldest son stayed living there during the week. So we were commuting the boys back and forth on the weekends, going to see their mom. So I did not live in this ranch full time. Thank goodness, because I think had I lived there full time, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I'm serious. I've reached out to all 3 of the boys. I have contact with the youngest son on Facebook. All 3 boys have moved out of state. All the adults that were on the ranch, they've all passed away now. So that's unfortunate. But all 3 of these boys that had experienced a lot of things on the ranch, they are still terrified. They're like moved on with their life. They're all very highly religious now. They are not in the state of Colorado anymore. So I think they're very PTSD. I think they're traumatized by this more so than my sister and I. And me and my sister, we've had our fair share with just the little bit we experienced. But you have to remember, though, during the week, we had my mom and her boyfriend there, and we'd always hear the adults talk about things going on all the time. This is where Linda Moulton Howe got her start. She was an investigative journalist out here in Elbert County, and this was the height of the mutilation. So that was all over the place. And so we'd always hear stories of like police being called and things like that. Cryptids. So we did have cryptid encounters. My sister had a pretty intense one. She went to the high school prom with the oldest son out there in the small town. After prom, they go back to the ranch. That you almost still can't talk to her about it. She's pretty frightened by that experience. And I do believe that involved one of these white fuzzies. I have a picture from the archives when I went to Dr. Sprinkles. I got all the original documents and drawings. And this was the drawing, and my mom called them white fuzzies because they were white gray-haired creatures. And it's interesting because Bob Sala said in Malmstrom there were soldiers seeing very similar creatures out there. So kind of different than your typical Bigfoot. These were light hair, gray-haired creatures out there. And what's interesting about the reports, and even I remember some things about that, but my sister more so than I do, they were like menacing. You know how you hear of cryptids like throwing rocks and things like that? These were like banging on the house, or they would watch from the barn area and things like that. So really strange. And then that strange encounter filming Beyond Skinwalker, where those footprints come out bipedal. They were definitely bipedal. They had a large stride, came out of nowhere, walked, disappeared. And that was really, really, really interesting. So you know, my personal experiences, though, the most frightening night, it was the boys' mother's birthday. So we were all there at the ranch house. It was on a weekend. It was early in the morning after midnight. All the adults were in the front room of that ranch house playing like board games and what. And me, my sister, and the three boys were in the boys' room, and that hum started up. I remember the hum because when that, everybody's like, you know, oh my God. And then at that time, all the power in the house goes out, and there was a huge bright, like brighter than anything, light out of the boys' window. And we're all like, oh my gosh, flipping out. That's when that disembodied electronic voice came through like every orifice of the house. And the reason I know what it says verbatim is because it's in the briefing document. And when I did a recreation, it was like an electronic, and I recreated it to the best of my memory. And when my sister heard that, and she was like almost having a PTSD moment as well. But it basically said, attention, we have allowed you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Please do not cause us to take action which you will regret. Your friends, meaning us, will be instructed to remain silent concerning us. And that's the quote, and it's in this document. And my mom and her boyfriend, I'm going to just say his name because they're no longer here, but his first name was Jack. They took that very seriously. And I can remember, you know, trying to tell, I'm 9, 10, 11 years old during these years. So, you know, in elementary school, and I had my good friends, Christy and Sandy, and I was trying to tell them, and, you know, I lived in a very haunted house. I was seeing shadow figures and hearing footsteps and all that kind of stuff going on. And I'm trying to tell my friends, and I just remember them, I don't know, maybe they thought I was a little weird or out there. And I learned very quickly to kind of shut my mouth. And then, of course, with my parents, you know, my mom saying, don't say anything about what's going on out there. Another interesting thing, we were out there, me and my sister, flipping the Frisbee. It was a, you know, spring day in front of the ranch house. There was a wet, heavy snow on the ground, but the sun was shining. And we looked down, it was dry dirt in this large, perfect circle. And it's so weird. I mean, it's such a clear, vivid memory to me. It was so bizarre because it was dry dirt. I mean, I remember kicking it with our feet and like, this is so weird. And then come to find out in the documents, there were two that APRO looked at two of these circles. One was in back of the ranch house and one was in the front. And they measured that circle at 75 feet in diameter, which is a very common circumference for these circles where nothing grows. So that was another experience. And then for me personally, me and my sister both had separate encounters as well. One time I was with the youngest son, and I was with Jack, and we were in the back of the pickup truck. And I remember going in back of the ranch house, and behind the ranch house is this huge forest of ponderosa pines. And in the front of the ranch house is kind of open. There's a pond there. I think you see it on Beyond Skinwalker where the landing site is and everything. But in the back of the ranch house is these ponderosa pines. There was a road. So we go, and there was this outbuilding, and Jack went and got something out, put it in the back of the truck. And he's like, well, let's drive you guys around, you know, the back of the forest. And I just remember, I don't remember why he stopped the truck, but he did. And all of a sudden we hear this, like, it sounded like bees or an electric, like if you're under a power line, that kind of, you know, and all of a sudden I look, and there was a box, and it was like this, and it was hovering off the ground. And I just remember Jack going, get in the truck, it's a box, it's a box, it's a box. And when Scott and I, we jump in the back of the pickup truck and take off. And I just remember looking back, and that box was gone. And that box was making tones. It was like illuminated from the inside. So, and then what was really interesting, and they didn't put it in the 3rd season of Beyond Skinwalker, but the team had made the decision to have my sister go out without me influencing her for that. So she goes out, and she's walking around, and, you know, for season 1, 2, and 3, we did film about my box encounter and where the box was, but it's never made any of the episodes because it just doesn't fit into they haven't talked about boxes at all. But they do have the footage. If it ever came up, they filmed it. But my sister, when we were walking out there behind the ranch house, she had a box encounter as well. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is where I had this box encounter. And the boxes were seen by several adults from many different places in the document. So it's just on and on. And then of course the boyfriend of the boys' mother at the time, who I suspect was with the military and was probably part of this. And the reason is because in some of these documents, he talks about experimenting with legal LSD. And we know with talking with whistleblowers that are in some of this MK Ultra programs, and even, in state hospitals and things, they were experimenting with what they called FM freaking magic, which was a combination of LSD and other drugs with some of these people. And it talked about different soldiers being on the property from Camp Carson. It said Warren blank from Camp Carson, felt something wrong. Something took over his mind, made him walk towards the woods, would release him, and he would run back to the ranch house. And this did this to him 5 times. Sounds like MK Ultra. Something in the box that maybe it's the Black Axis military. So that's always been kind of my quest, I guess. If I have a quest, it's how much of this is paranormal in nature, and how much of it is, our Black Axis projects. And then the question becomes, well, which came first, chicken or the egg? Because this document right here, which is wonderful, it talks about, it's called The Choppers and the Choppers. If anybody's interested in getting a PDF of this, it's really a quick, really interesting read. Go to RockyMountainRanchResearch.org or KatiePaige.net, and it's PAIG, and I'll send you the PDF if you just send me, and I'll send this to you. But this talks about all the blacked out choppers, and there's newspaper. I have a huge folder of, it's in the drawer down here, but huge thick folder of newspaper articles from back in the day. And some of these were these choppers, like menacing little kids on these ranches, and I'm like, what is that about? So many different things were going on out there, from cattle mutilations, and not just cows, but horse and dog, and people were panicking. And I mean, just everything, to the hums, to the bangs, which makes me think about underground tunneling, to the helicopters, to the cryptids, to the ETs. There's, supposedly 2 types of ETs out there. And what's really fascinating, Daniel, is where I thought this was just like a kind of a little window of time. Oh no, it's still continuing to this day. And that's one thing I have to thank Beyond Skinwalker for. It's really opened the door for me to meet local people that are still out there, and I get to hear what's still happening now, including getting to know Greg and Chris. Unfortunately, his wife Chris passed away after season 1, and Nicole, his daughter. So, it's just still ongoing.
Wow. So let's back up a little bit. First of all, with the hums and banging underground, was there any accompanying physical sensations with that? Dizziness, weakness, any of that?
Very much so, yes. I'm really glad that you asked that, because even in the reports, I experienced it as well. But there's paralysis several times during these encounters, heart palpitation, definitely headaches, and all these kind of things. And, something that I just recently, and I don't remember if we covered this last time, but I have tied this together just in the last few months, and what I'm uncovering kind of blows my mind. That night of the disembodied electronic voice, so we were all scared and panicked. Our house was 45 minutes away. We lived Arapahoe and I-25, about 45 minutes away. So we drive home that night. We walk in the front door. I fall to the ground, and I couldn't speak. I started getting the really bad tunnel vision, vomiting, and my mom and sister are like, what did you eat? What did you eat? And I'm trying to say peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I couldn't speak. And that maybe lasted 5-10 minutes. I don't know. They walked me upstairs, and I got my first full-blown migraine headache that night. And I continued to have these migraine headaches so often, I was missing a lot of school. So my mom puts me on medication, takes me to the doctor, all this stuff. Well, eventually, a few months later, like 3-4 months later, a gentleman approaches my mom at work, hands her a newspaper article, and tells her about this program called the Twilight Learners Program in the Denver Tech Center. Just happens to be 2 buildings over from my mom's work. And it is the biofeedback program run by Thomas H. Badinsky. So and their cassette tapes, I have the one downstairs. But this is the program I was put in for 1.5 years. And I went every week, and they'd hook up, little things to my fingers, into my head, and put on the earphones. And I was learning to raise and lower my hand temperatures and get control of my migraine headaches. Come to find out, only because on UAP studies, we had a guest talking about the Gateway Project, the Gateway Program. And so I started listening to the Gateway tapes. This is just recently. And Gateway tape number 3, you go into a deep body relaxation. Like your arms are heavy and warm, warmth is flowing in. I'm like, oh my God, this is from my biofeedback training. And so I start researching Thomas H. Badinsky. Turns out he's a navigational engineer at Area 51, worked on the SR-71 Blackbird. I find an old video, and I'll put it on my webpage, but there's an old video talking about Thomas H. Badinsky, and they're working with this little kid in that video. Same thing I went through. His name's Kevin. And in that video, they're like, okay, Kevin, can you make the rocket go up? Can you land the rocket? And I'm like, holy. Not only that, he worked with the Menninger Foundation, the Gateway Project, the Stargate Project, and the Monroe Institute. We know all of these are CIA programs. And what they did and what they do in the bio. And I have to say, anybody, if your migraine headache suffers, biofeedback worked for me. I get them very, very rarely now, and never to the intensity I did before the biofeedback. But what they do is, they keep you in a theta state. So you're like that's why I was always able to lucid dream. So if you want to train to lucid dream and interact with your dreams, train with biofeedback, train with Gateway, because it keeps you in that theta state. And I think, but beware, because I think it also opens up channels. So for a paranormal life, I think that's true. And I think they were researching that probably in the 50s, 60s, 70s and onward, and still probably are to this day.
Definitely would not surprise me at all. It's very interesting because I know there's been reports of similar humming and banging noises there in specifically in the Smoky Mountain area, and people having physical reactions, including and up to literally passing out during those episodes. So that's one of the reasons why I was curious about that. Let's talk for a moment about the fuzzy white guys. So as I'm sure you have heard from Trey, that in North Alabama and in some parts of Tennessee, there's the creature they call White Thing. Very similar to what you're describing. Obviously, this creature is predominantly white, not necessarily gray. Do you feel, was there any kind of connection, telepathy, any mind speak at all, any type of connectiveness with those creatures?
Yeah, there's a great book actually called Psychic Sasquatch. It's on my shelf back here. I have it's right behind my sign here. I'm trying to think of do you mind if I grab it?
Oh, go ahead.
All right. This book too, right here. Let's see. This one was Psychic. Oh man, I have so many books here. Right here. I have a whole cryptid section here, and it's fascinating because it's not just Sasquatch either. It's these large birds, these pterodactyl birds or these phoenix birds, these platypus creatures out here. But this book right here, The Psychic Sasquatch, I recommend this book by Jack Kawani. Lapseratus. I don't know if I said that right, Lapseratus, but check it out. This one also, The Silent Invasion by Stan Gordon, the Pennsylvania. So there was another case very similar to Rocky Mountain Ranch in Ohio, Pennsylvania, that involved police officers, these Sasquatch that are menacing, like not only throwing rocks, but I mean, what is that about? But yes, psychic communication. And I feel like, and I love this because this book is the UFO Bigfoot case book. So I feel there's some cases of cryptids or Sasquatch that aren't connected to UFOs. And then there's a whole bunch. I mean, look how thick this book is that are connected to UFOs. And in the Rocky Mountain Ranch, they were definitely connected to the UFOs. In fact, my sister, who very almost matter of factly was like, you know, I feel like they were either, and if you think about it, it makes sense to me. Like I hate to, don't laugh people, but like bodyguards or workers or something. And if you think about the cattle mutilations, if the UFOs have anything to do with that, these are large animals. Are they ET themselves? Are they able to communicate telepathically like that? I believe so, yes. And you hear case after case where they're really, especially some of these female Sasquatch that are really interested in children and women and things like that, and the family dynamic. So yeah, I believe that that's true. And yes, I believe that was happening at the ranch.
Does not surprise me. Again, another common factor. A lot of people discover mind speak. I've had my own experiences with that, with the Sasquatch. I got to tell you, early on, I was hearing stories of the connection between Sasquatch and UFOs. And that's one of the things that has been an ongoing part of my research and investigation, is the connection between those, because I don't believe you can separate any of it, to be honest with you. I think it's all connected. Let's talk a little bit about the black box for a moment. And before we get into that, I just wanted to, for those of you who are watching, if you resonate with anything that you've heard so far, if there's something that kind of catches your ear and you go, oh, wait a minute, this is familiar, drop us a little bit of a comment to let us know about the things that you've experienced that have been brought up so far tonight. The black boxes or black cubes. Tell us a little bit about your experience with those, because that's another thing that Trey has also mentioned and other people have mentioned, popping up in high strangeness areas.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me because there's, you know, even with Snippy, the Carl Higdon case in 1974 in Medicine Bow, Wyoming, these boxes will pop up in these cases from time to time. What's fascinating, and you mentioned Trey as well, out there in the meadows. What's fascinating to me about them, they are described in all different dimensions. Some of them have lights that illuminate from inside. Some of them do not. Some of them make sounds. Some of them do not. So are some of them ours and some of them theirs? Are all of them ours? I don't know. In the case of the Carl Higdon box, where there was elk involved, and that was a really good case. In fact, I'm hoping that will, you know, co-author another book in line with the Snippy and the Socorro book about the Carl Higdon case, because there's so much evidence in that at Dr. Leo Sprinkles. I mean, the original photographs in that, and they have a photograph of a burn mark, kind of like the circle on the ground at Rocky Mountain Ranch, but it's a box. You can see the box mark on the ground, and the shell casing from the bullet that just was like stopped in midair and turned inside out. And the medical records, Carl Higdon went to the hospital that night. Also, that is an amazing case that needs to be more well known. But these boxes are mysterious to me. The one I saw was like 18 to 20 inches, you know, maybe 9 to 10 inches this way. I saw it for a very quick amount of time. The ones that are described in the report were seen on the box or on the ground behind the ranch house. And in one of the reports that I did not witness, so I do not know, this comes from, you know, John, the boyfriend of the mother, who I question, you know, what he was really up to. But he actually says that the Sasquatch warned him that these boxes were lethal, and that, you know, if you don't believe me, he actually had a Sasquatch approach the box and it dropped him to his knees. That's in the report. I don't know if that happened, if it didn't happen, if it was an LSD. I don't know. I didn't witness it, but I can say it's in the report along with other things with these ETs. And we can get to the ETs before the end of the show, because one of my most mind-blowing experiences I had in kind of finding other witnesses, and that it's a whole story that has to do with one of the sketches of one of the ETs that were seen on the ranch. But yeah, these Sasquatch and these boxes, are they connected? I was at a conference speaking in Laughlin many years ago, and I had a woman come up to me after, and she's like, do you think these boxes could have anything to do with the mutilations? Because one thing ranchers were reporting when I'd interview ranchers is in the pastures where these mutilations were being done, the cows were calm and huddled together. And in adjoining pastures, they were all like freaked out and braying and all, that. And so she's like, do you think these boxes could emit some sort of frequency or tone that was calming the cattle? You know what I'm saying? Like hypnotizing them in a sense. And could they be doing that to people? Could that be what's paralyzing the people? I don't know. I don't know. Is it a communication device? What is its intention exactly? I'm not sure, but many different reports of different sizes. Even reports, I was surprised that we sometimes get cubes or boxes flying in our skies from credible reports. Richard Haynes actually has some great pilot reports of these cubes flying in our atmosphere. And I believe one of the witnesses at one of the hearings said there was an orb with a cube inside of it. So those are reported.
Wow. Ray, I agree with you. That is definitely true. Yeah, because here's the thing. The cube continuously comes up with high strangeness areas. I remember my own experience. Like I was literally, the first thing I was ever taught to draw was a 3-dimensional cube. And I always thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a connection with the cubes. You mentioned them flying. My brain immediately went to a book that was written, during the early 70s about the orange glowing things that they were actually calling sky creatures. Back then, there was a whole book written about them. Somehow I feel a connection between those and the cubes. I'm not sure exactly how. But let's camp there for a moment because I want to get into the thing about the aliens. But what is your thoughts on the connectivity between all of this?
I've gone many different places through the years. Because there's been questions throughout, and I'm sure you have similar questions. Like one common question I have, even in talking to Tom and Sally Miller out there in Trinidad, and why mutilations are hit with certain ranchers and other ranchers are left alone. Is it the land, the people, both? I mean, what's happening there? Why does the hitchhiker phenomenon seem to be attracted to certain individuals more so than others? What is that about, and why is that? How are all these different phenomena interconnected from, like my podcast that I started, the trifecta, and that's what it is, right? It's a trifecta of UFOs and paranormal and cryptids. How are they interconnected, and why are they interconnected? And I just can't help but believe at this point that we are an important ingredient in all of this. Us as individuals, that we're able to manifest and interact with the phenomenon. Certain people that are kind of, I don't like to use the term invited in, because you got to be careful what you're inviting in. But if you're curious and open and not something, working with many experiencers through the years and going through 3.5 years of all of Dr. Sprinkle's letters. And that's what my first book, Letters of Love and Light, is about. I got lost in these people's letters. I just would go to the archives. Maybe it's because I raised 5 kids and it was like my solitude. I was like, oh, I can escape into the archives where it's quiet. And I just loved it. So I would spend days there and just read through letters. And so many commonalities. I got to the point after 3 years of reading letters from all sorts of people from all around the world. I can get into like paragraph 1 or 2 and kind of, because, you have that sliver of people who, might have mental illness and are just kind of, way, way out there. Not that I still feel they need an ear, and you still need to listen to what they're saying. In fact, maybe whatever the phenomenon is attracted to people like that, or maybe perhaps being I have a half brother who is institutionalized, and that maybe that might be part of the reason they're that way to begin with, because they're kind of walking this fine line between our physical normal reality and something that's like not understood, right? So I'm very open to that, and I'm not judging anybody at all for that. But then you get into these letters of people, that these themes you would see over and over and over again, which are lucid dreams. Like, was this a dream or was this a memory? Because for these people, these dreams they're having are so real. It's like more real than their waking life. And that was, so a whole chapter of my book is dreams or memories. People who are having telepathic downloads. At first, I kind of was like, well, I don't know about that. Like, right? But then the more you study and you do psychic development, and the big word of the day right now is psionics, and the telepathy tapes and things like that. Well, that's real. That's happening. They're able to scientifically look at this now. And so as you train and you learn to do these things, you can distinguish your own voice from what people would call a download or guidance, whether you from a spirit guide or whatever greater being you believe in. People call it by different names, but you can learn to distinguish those voices. And I do believe that we all experience that for sure. So I think all of this plays into the high strangeness. And just going back to the boxes for just 1 second, a tesseract, is that what they're called? The boxes that can go, because you hear like at the Carl Higdon, they enter a box that's one size and then they get in and it seems to expand, right? And become quite large. And it's not just a phenomenon in the United States either. Paul Sinclair in the UK also experienced the box in various similar ways, lit, sounds, hums. So this is a global thing. It's not just in the United States, which is important to know that, because yes, we have a military presence overseas, but it makes it harder for me to believe it's all our military if that's the case. So I don't know. I just think the answers are so deep, and I think it's a little of all of it, especially at the Rocky Mountain Ranch in particular, because we do have a heavy military presence out here. So yes, a sliver of it is that. But when it comes to the chicken or the egg, I feel the phenomenon really predates the military presence, and that's really important. And going to the archives and digging up, the history of that land in particular, we came across, it was known as the Mulligan Homestead, and Dick Mulligan, if you just Googled like Dick Mulligan Winter Park Ski Resort. So Dick Mulligan was born and raised on this ranch property. And what's interesting about it, he's an Irishman, which that's interesting too, because there's something about Irish, and that's a whole thing. But so he's an Irishman, born and raised on the Rocky Mountain Ranch. And it said that, in his later years, he became a caretaker of Winter Park Ski Resort here in the Rocky Mountains. And Dick Mulligan was known to have bold exaggeration and the gift of gab. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, no. He was trying to tell people what was happening on the ranch. And they're going, oh, Dick, you're such a hoot. Oh, my God, you're such a storyteller. So much so it's in the papers. Like, that's what he was known for. And so I think that just goes to show, and even like old timers that live in the area, it way predated the military presence. So this has been going on for probably millennia out there. You know, it was a very nomadic area for many different tribes: the Ute, Cheyenne, Comanche, Pawnee, Kiowa. It was people. It was hunting grounds out there. You know, thousands and thousands of buffalo, in rivers and streams, and it's, you know, very highly magnetic, and so it has certain types of, you know, limestone and crystals, and just like in the valley. So you have rocks and minerals. Same even at the Stanley Hotel, you have the waters and the limestone and the crystal. I think that retains something, you know, like the crystal skulls, like it retains memory, and maybe it can play things back, like residual hauntings at certain haunted locations. It's very similar in paranormal things, like all paranormal things. I mean, so if we had UFOs and orbs and cryptids and pterodactyl birds and things, maybe they're being played back in like a time loop. So all these things come into play, and I think that's why it's so hard, and nobody can really get a handle on it, because it's all these things interplaying at the same time.
Wow. Yeah. James asked, what would happen if you had a priest bless these type places? Would the activity increase, or get worse? Or no, would the activity cease or get worse?
Yeah, that's a good question, James. And I feel like it's our intention plays a role. So if you go in, let's say, and I know a lot of us, we wouldn't be human if we didn't have our up and downs, right? So humans can get in some dark places, right? Some depressed places. And if you're in this lower vibe frequency, you're going to be more open to let these negative things kind of come in and affect you in negative ways. And it's also how we interpret things, right? I know for me, if I'm in a more positive, encouraged state and I'm feeling, you know, love and light and, you know, joy to others and giving to others, it's going to have a harder time being a negative force for me. So again, I think that's an important question, James, because we are the ones that are receiving the information and interpreting the information and allowing good, bad, or otherwise to come in, right? So I think that's so important, that we go in with the right state of mind, no matter where we are, actually. And you can feel it. People feel it all the time. You walk into a room, you can feel if there's a negative vibe or energy there, or if somebody's suffering. It can affect everybody around us because we're all interconnected that way. So
exactly. Okay, I've been kind of cringing thinking about this part of the discussion, but let's talk about those aliens. Like, give me what you got there.
Okay, so I have not had an alien encounter face to face, or a UFO landed encounter, but in the reports from the ranch, the adults there, and many different adults did. Now, what's interesting about this, when I went to the archives and I pulled out the reports, there were two types seen there. And there were these blonde, blue-eyed Nordic types, and there were these tubby guys. That's a whole other story. I went on a Paul Giamatti's show, the Chinwag. I didn't know who Paul Giamatti was.
Oh, wow.
And so I showed up downtown. I went to Denver, and it was supposed to be a 1 hour interview. We ended up talking for almost 3 hours. So they made it a 2-part interview. You could see it on Chinwag. But I walk into the studio, and there's this guy that kind of looked familiar, and he's wearing a mind control shirt. And I'm like, cool shirt. I said, you kind of look familiar. And he goes, yeah, I've been in a few movies. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I started talking to this other kid, which was so funny. So after the interview, I get home and I did a Google search on who he was. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. Had I known, I probably would have been a nervous wreck. So anyway, Paul Giamatti names these ETs Tubby guys. Okay. So in the archives, there's drawings of Tubby guy. And I put it in my back pocket. I didn't share it anywhere. This was early on when I was investigating all this stuff, when I was still with MUFON and everything. And at the time for Colorado MUFON, I was the guest speaker coordinator. So I learned about this book right here. And all I knew, it was about a ranch. And in the book, he he says he uses a pseudonym for his name. I now know him pretty well. But turns out his ranch was 14 miles away from the Rocky Mountain Ranch in my childhood. Okay. And I'm sitting in the third row watching his presentation, and up pops this drawing of these ETs that he saw out there around the same time as, you know, all these experiences. And so here I'm going to pop up some drawings. And all right. Well, first I'll start with this was the one in the file that was seen at the ranch. Tubby guy. All right. So he has smaller, you know, kind of pathetic. He's described as being kind of pathetic. These long, spindly arms and legs, this helmet, this strange apparatus covering his chest, kind of wrinkles here, wrinkles there on his thing. And yeah, so this is Tubby guy. So I'm watching. So here on the left was the guy from the Rocky Mountain Ranch. This was the guy from 14 miles away, but these tubes, he said, came out. So this was the second drawing that he had of his guy. He was seeing the tree with the tubes out. And I'm like, I don't know about you, but these are pretty similar. The eyes, the heavy brow, the wrinkles, the tubes that come out. And we didn't know of each other. And we were 14 miles away around the same time. So this was like, holy smokes. I was, what? What? And what the report said was that the Nordics and the Tubby guys, they were in conflict with one another. And as so long as we mind our own business, they would leave us alone if we left them alone. And part of me feels like, just intuitively, or I don't know what that is, but I feel like the conflict was about the direction humanity was taking. I think they have an interest in what we're going to do with AI. With Neuralink, with everything, like which way is humanity going to go? I was also hypnotized for an hour and a half by Dr. Leo Sprinkle. He feels there was more to my encounter out there than what I want to accept or recognize. So he wanted to put me under, and it took me a week to listen back to that dang recording, but I did. And one of them, I was talking that that they were well-oiled machines, and they wanted to have a hybrid program to integrate more creativity and individualism in their species, because, you know, we're a very creative species with highs and lows, kind of bipolar species, and they've lost that through time. They've been able to streamline. So they got rid of a lot of the things we all wish we can get rid of, right? Cancers, illness, disease. They've streamlined their organs and their systems very AI-like, very mechanical-like. The tall grays are very AI-like, but they took it too far, and now they don't have what we have, you know, humanity. So they want to integrate some of that back. That's what came out under my hypnosis. I don't know where that came from, but that's what was there. The weirdest part about listening back to that was when my voice changed to a little girl's, and it went, and I wasn't scared. It was the creepiest thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't know. I have no conscious memory of that, so I don't know where or what that is. But that's part of the story too. I don't know. You know.
Wow. So yeah, the alien aspect. A little bit, yeah. You missed.
Go back and watch it.
The alien aspect to me is a little more than disturbing in some ways, because there's this tendency for us to, I guess, associate all alien activity with bad. Because so let's go back for a moment. Let me back up a little bit. So with the cattle mutilations, those have been connected to UFO activity. There's a lot of speculation that the whole procedures, all the procedures that they're doing, the taking of soft tissue, the taking of blood, and so forth, is part of a hybridization experiment or hybridization process, where, because a lot of people, a lot of women have said that in their abduction experiences, that they were impregnated and then the baby just disappeared, and later they were abducted again and brought back on craft, and they were introduced to the child. So there's that aspect, which I find somewhat disturbing, a lot disturbing in a sense. Then you get the connectivity with with Area 51, and we read about the instances like the Kelly Hopkinsville case, which made no sense whatsoever. If you really read that case, like, none of that made any sense. You know, you had these little goblin type creatures that when they were fired at, they would turn flips and disappear and all that kind of stuff. It was almost like very circus-like in a sense. But as that experience unfolded and you kind of process through that experience, you process through the stories of Roswell and so forth, there is a tendency for us to kind of demonize the alien experience a lot, and even to the point where people, there's this growing theory that demons, cryptids, so forth, are connected to Nephilim, and that sort of thing. So it's it lends itself to a very cringy, I think, experience. So that's the word I'm going to use right now.
Cringy. Well, first of all, it took, like I said throughout this podcast, I like documents and research and all that. So it took me a long time, and maybe that's why I won't really accept or talk much about my own experiences with the abduction phenomenon, because it took me a long time to even, I went back and forth on, are abductions even happening? Are they real? I know Travis Walton, he's a good friend. I know others, and I believe them. I believe it. For me, it came down to, well, do we believe ETs here? Have they ever visited Earth? And if the answer is yes to that, then it would make sense that they would abduct us to learn about us, because we would do the same thing. We would absolutely do the same thing. What's interesting about it, so first of all, I agree with you, it's cringy, because anytime you're taking anybody against their will for any reason, it's a crime. It's traumatic, especially if they have the ability to erase our memories, to mess with our minds. I mean, these are electronic. I mean, it's probably not that difficult. That's what MK Ultra was about. I'm sure we're all being manipulated all the time. Every single one of us, through our phones, through the television, through commercials, through radio, through media, through everything. We're all being manipulated all the time, more so than any of us truly want to even believe. And so the fact that aliens have the ability to do that, yeah, it's cringy. It's a good word for it, especially if they're taking babies and doing that. At the same time, though, over and over and over again, even Travis Walton, who at first thought, oh my gosh, I was hit with this blue beam, they took me, they wounded me, but later he came to believe, oh no, they took me to heal me, to bring me back. They brought me back. So many experiencers claim to come back and have this spiritual awakening, this where it's more of a positive in their life than a negative, for whatever reason. Now, some people claim that's tricksters, it's demons, it's demonic. Be careful with that. So you have the whole range of that happening. But in my personal opinion, anybody who gets put on a path where it's going to raise their consciousness and put them in a more loving state, a more unified state of I hate to use the word again, but like love and light instead of this dark negative, then that's a positive thing. And as far as the cattle mutilations go, I've heard many different things, you know, through Christopher O'Brien's work and Linda Howe and Chuck Zukowski and all these pioneers that have spent many, many more years on the mutilations than I have. But some of the theories out there, and I've heard this through people who claim to have information about S4 and Area 51 as well, that some of the ETs absorb nutrients differently than we do because they don't have, you know, they don't ingest food like we do. So they'll absorb it through their skin. And they'll take the blood from these animals that are high on copper because they need a lot of copper. And then they'll just kind of leave the carcass there. I mean, that's not very nice. So it may not be as dark and awful as you might think that it is, or others. So, I mean, it's awful that they're killing animals, but we eat animals. Hello, East Texas. I might be out there in Austin in a few weeks, I hope. Anyway, yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. And for me, my experiences as a young child were pretty frightening. I mean, with the shadow figures and the paranormal type of things going on. However, everything's frightening when you're 9, 10, 11 years old. I mean, you're scared of the boogeyman and everything. And thank goodness for Big Sister, because I never slept alone. You know, it was all those kind of things. Check under the bed, check under the closet, all that kind of stuff. But now it feels more, you know, things still happen that are unexplained. You know, I have anomalies with electronics and lights and TVs and things like that. But it doesn't seem frightening to me, actually. I don't know if it's like I have a lot of people now who have passed away. I don't know if it's just, hey, we're here, or if it's like, sometimes it feels very protective. And, you know, I think I shared with you the time the TV came on, it was about car accidents and that. And I felt like, oh, you know, so that felt very much protective. Like I better drive the speed limit and be extra alert. And sure enough, you know, I think that it did save me from being in a head-on collision. So you hear these stories all the time, guardian angels or things like that. And for a lot of these experiencers, those scary, cringy experiences turn into that. So I don't know if I can argue with that. It's all bad and negative. I think, again, it's how we perceive it and how we interpret it. But again, it's never okay. If indeed there's species abducting us, it's never okay, obviously. Unless, of course, there's the story of Eisenhower giving them permission, you know, and well, they went over their quota, you know, so I don't know if that's true or not, but that's, you know, rumored.
Yeah, there was, so early on, one of the people who I followed and read a lot of their literature was William Cooper, who was the author of a book called Behold the Pale Horse. And he went into a lot on the big deal or the great deal or whatever that was. And the agreement supposedly between the government and the Greys and that sort of thing. And it was just, again, that whole book, that whole experience to me was very mind-blowing. It was a moment where I changed a lot of my view for a while on the interactions, the whole concept. It really caused me to have to go back and kind of I guess deprogram some of the things that I had learned from that particular, because we we hear these things. We hear about the supposed contracts between the government and aliens. We hear about Area 51. Was it Bob Lazarus?
X4.
And and the things that that you said, and there's a lot of very disturbing possibilities there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where when we start talking about high strangeness and areas of high strangeness, there's in my research, I talk about the 3 zones of high strangeness in the country. And one of them being the North Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, going all the way up to Ohio. Then you've got the area where you're at, Colorado, Las Vegas, Utah, New Mexico, that area there.
We just had Thomas Ferrario on, and he's Marley Woods, and that's one of those locations too. And I, like you, Daniel, I've looked at the electromagnetics of these areas, the geology of these areas, the ley lines, right? The different. And it's interesting because if you put a pin in Skinwalker in Elbert County in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and so, I mean, it's almost like this. It's an interesting parallel and this through line, and you wonder, I don't know. There's many dots that you can connect to all these high strangest locations. Then again, they go around the globe too. I love that. Paul Sinclair's doing great work out there in the UK as well. And it always blows my mind anytime I talk with him on, the boxes and the hum sounds and the blue orbs and the disembodied, conversations you hear and music tones and things like this. So yeah, I don't know. There's gotta be someday, I think we're going to find better answers to all this. I'm confident in that. And I feel like that's true because we're able to communicate like this now, where before we couldn't do that.
Right. And that's, so one of the things that you mentioned too, that I find very interesting is you mentioned that there's a thing with the Irish, the Scottish and the Irish in a sense. Very interesting because I've definitely, that's been part of my focus too. The connection, the connectivity with the Celtics and this thing. I don't know. There's honestly, Katie, this is one of the reasons why I find you so fascinating. You literally bring just a whole new level of like questioning, and you open our minds to seeing other possibilities and looking at things in a way that we normally may not look at them. So I think that's one of the things that really make you a key part of the whole, the part of the big part of the answer that we're looking for at times.
Well, I appreciate that, Daniel. That's nice of you to say. I just feel like, and I agree, like I've met so many people, so much so if I meet somebody with green eyes, especially blue eyes, I can almost guarantee they're going to have some sort of story to tell you, whether it's paranormal or cryptid or alien or whatever. But you have to remember, it's not just that one culture. It's every culture in the world has their own folklore, has their own kind of belief pattern, right? And I think that plays a role. Again, I think we're an important key to this. So Puerto Rico, for example, has so many sightings, and that it's just a hotbed of activity. Brazil, I mean, around the globe, this is a global phenomenon. And I don't like just kind of section out. There's a book here on this whole wall is also books over here, but where they talk about the RH negative, right? And I know that's a question we like to ask, and there's been studies done on the RH negative bloodline. But you got to think if there's millions probably of ET species out in our universe. I like that line. It's a populated universe, right? Whether they can make it here to Earth or are they interdimensional or whatever, that's a whole other question. But we know it's a populated universe. So obviously it's not going to just be, oh, we like the Nordics or in the Danes and the Swedes or the Irish or the Scottish, or, there's got to be, it's everybody. We're all interesting. But I think it's an important area of study too. I don't think it should be overlooked because, I think anthropology and genetics is just interesting in general. So, so just one of those things again, but there's something to that though, because through the years, every person I've ever asked in that, and maybe part of that too is we're more open to this topic than ever before. So people are more willing to share their strange and unusual stories than they were maybe 10, 15 years ago. So it could just be that too,
So Ray asked, have you ever spoke to a psychic to better understand what you've been through?
Yeah, I've been to a couple psychics. Pretty good. One reading was better than the other. And like I mentioned earlier in the show, I had Dr. Leo Sprinkle put me under for an hour and a half. That was an interesting experience just because, I'm on the fence about, how reliable hypnosis is. You can use hypnosis to help all sorts of things, to lose weight, to quit smoking, to stop eating chocolate, those kind of things. And it's just it was a different experience for me. Dr. Leo Sprinkle used the escalator or elevator method. So you just get into this very deep, and of course I had my biofeedback training when I was a kid. So I can get into that deep relaxed state pretty easily thanks to my biofeedback training in the Twilight Learners training. But it's really, so you're just in this very deep relaxed state and you can even keep your eyes open if you want. I chose to keep mine closed. And what I loved about Dr. Leo Sprinkle's method, and I've even done like past life regression once or twice like that, and that was an interesting experience too. But I loved how he didn't lead the questions. He didn't, he really made you like, what shoes are you wearing? What does the floor look like? What does the room smell like? So he used all your senses, which I felt was a really good way to do that. So like if any of you listeners out there, if you do the gateway tapes or whatever meditation you use to get into a deep relaxed state and you find yourself in that kind of twilight state or that theta state, you can start kind of going a little bit out of your body and start, trying to smell smells or try to look at the floor or, the walls. And one thing that really helped with unpacking memories from the ranch and everything was remembering like one memory, like the gold yellow shag carpet would lead to, oh yeah, the shag carpet. And that reminded me of the Pong game, which reminded me of that TV, which reminded me of the wallpaper on the wall, which, and one will trigger another and another. And that's kind of how you start to unpack some of those buried memories. It's kind of a cool practice to do.
Definitely. Definitely. Interdimensional is fascinating. Ray says, what the heck is dimension and how do you travel through them?
Yeah, well, you can Google the gateway tapes and start going through the gateway tapes. We've been doing that. So get yourself a good pair of headphones or earbuds, and you can do binaural beats, which is really good at kind of synchronizing your hemispheres of your brain. It helps train you to stay in that theta state. So once you do that and you start training in this way, you'll start lucid dreaming more so you can interact with your dreams. You might find yourself maybe start a dream journal, go to bed at night with the intention of remembering a dream. Like, I want to remember my dream. And then you can wake up in the morning and tape record what you remember or write it down, whichever you prefer. But the more you work these skills, the better you'll become at it. And that helps with the gateway tapes in particular. If you start training through them, you kind of start to learn to astro travel a little bit to where you can leave your physical body and go out in kind of the ethers. And that's kind of a fun practice too, because then you can ask the big profound questions like, what is my purpose here? What's my job here on earth? What am I here to do? And sometimes that'll intuitively come to you in those moments. So that's pretty neat. Yeah, you can get them for free. Don't pay for them, Ray. Don't pay for them because they can be really expensive. You can find them. It's actually blue on YouTube. It's a blue gateway tapes, and you can start there, and they're for free. So do those.
Yeah. I imagine you have a few resources out there that are really good to work with. I want to encourage you guys to go check out Katie's page, her website. Definitely check out the books. I've got to tell you, the method that you use, the way that you go about describing things, your experiences, and your insight on things, I feel like helps a lot of us to kind of process. Like I said, I find there are things in my own experiences that I find very cringy. And it's really, it's very calming to me after a bit to kind of listen to and process through as you talk, because there are things that you say and I go, oh yeah, that rings a bell, or that triggers a memory, and I'm like, do we got to do this right now? Yeah, we need to do this right now. Obviously, the universe has put it there. So I really appreciate that, definitely.
You're welcome. I appreciate you saying that, Daniel. And just remember, I mean, this is a journey that we're all on. And it takes a lot of time to process these things, especially when you live a paranormal life and have had experiences. For me, that's why it's taken years to, I mean, I still, the Rocky Mountain Ranch book has been many, many years in the making, and it gets postponed. And I'm always like, oh, well, that happened because all this new stuff's happened with Beyond Skinwalker and new things. I'm learning new things. Twilight, all this stuff is still coming. So everything happens in its own time. But what people don't understand, for me, this is so personal that I'll learn and then I'll have to process. And you have to be kind to yourself. You have to be patient with yourself. Let yourself heal and process. And sometimes that means you're going to ebb and flow in your research. And I know, I hope you do a book too. I think we all need to share everything we can with each other, but give yourself time to heal, process. It just takes time. And I think that's why we're all incarnated on this earth, is to learn. Right. I mean, it's a hard knocks. This is a hard planet to be on. And if we're not kind to ourselves first and foremost, we can't be kind to others. And so it's been a huge process for me, a lot of PTSD, a lot of therapy, a lot of ups and downs. And I'm still like, I had a bad day yesterday. And so you just have to ride the wave and try to stay up more than down. And I'm still fighting that battle all the time. But I think the ultimate thing is that we're here to share and learn from each other. So I appreciate you saying all that's really super nice of you.
It's very true.
Thanks.
Wow. I think it's very important for us to understand, and I want to touch on Travis Walton and his story for just a moment. I followed the Travis Walton case early on. It was one of the cases that, when the movie came out, I was just kind of like, oh, wow, this is intense, and it's very interesting because the town of Snowflake, which is where Travis was living at the time of this incident, was actually founded by the Latter-day Saints. It was a very small community that they founded at one point. So I found that very interesting because there's some family connection to the LDS. And as I begin to kind of dissect Travis' story, there were moments where I was like, okay, why was it that these guys saw what happened? First of all, why had he decided to just jump out of the truck and go running up to something like that to start with? But then there's moments where you start wondering, okay, so what did his companions experience? Did they experience anything? Was there something that transpired that they may have seen that would have clued in to what was actually the reason why he was taken, that maybe they didn't interpret or didn't understand at the time as, oh, this is a clue as to what happened, because they took off. I don't blame them. I would have taken off too. I'd been like, whoa. Right. And then eventually Travis, of course, came to the conclusion that the abduction was not necessarily an actual abduction, but they were trying to heal him. Right. And I found that very interesting, because that was a part of the story, that was a part of the process, that was kind of a missing piece to the puzzle. It's like, why did you take him? Well, that makes sense.
Right. I was going to say, I have a few things to say about Travis Walton. First of all, there's this event coming up called the Skyfire Summit. Yes. It's the 50th anniversary of, so if you just search that, you can learn more about that. Travis Walton will be there. This is a fascinating case so in the Letters of Love and Light, the book I did on the 4 decades of Dr. Leo Sprinkle's work, in those letters I was telling you about, and it's dated, I need my glasses, but this was a letter I came across written from a pastor, dated, so the letter was dated March 13th, 1981, but it says, it was the year between 1931 and 1934. Our bus ran through a small place I believe to be Snowflake, Arizona. He had a very similar encounter, this pastor, in Snowflake, Arizona. And I have that letter from him in this book. So that's interesting. But what really, really sparked my interest on Travis Walton's return. So, in Elbert County, I did a FOIA request. There were 2 interceptors that crashed in Elbert County. And in Dr. Leo Sprinkle's files, it said they were in pursuit of a UFO. Now, this is at the high peak of the mutilations with Linda Howe and everything. So I sent a FOIA and got the report back. Supposedly, it was an instructor pilot and a student pilot. They were in pursuit, and in the report it says they misidentified the beacon light of another aircraft, which they never identified in this huge report. The instructor hits the tail wing. These are 2 A-7D interceptors scrambled out of Buckley Air Force Base, and both pilots ejected. Both pilots survived. Okay, but what's interesting, the instructor, 8 of his instrumentation panel lights were inoperative. So a lot of unusual things. They had 218 live rounds of ammo on board. They're flying over residential over Elizabeth and Kiowa and Elbert County. But what's interesting, I came across on that very same day, November 11, 1975, out of Falcon, Selfridge, Michigan, out of Falconbridge, Ontario, they're seeing multiple unknown UFOs, UAPs on radar. They're being witnessed by military men and women and police officers and civilians on the ground. So they decide to scramble 2 F-106 Delta Darts out of Selfridge, Michigan over the Great Lakes. I think they were traveling 35 nautical miles, these UAPs, but they were going from 26,000 feet up to 74,000 feet, just straight up on radar. So they're scrambling these on the same day that they're scrambling them out of Buckley. Okay, so 4 interceptors, and they admit it, front page paper, United States Air Force scrambles jets out of Selfridge, Michigan. But you know what else happens on that same day? Edmund Fitzgerald sinks. Okay. And then also that morning, right after midnight, Travis Walton was returned. All of these things happened on that day.
Wow.
So something was going on. November 11, 1975. Not only that, but when I went back to the archives, Richard Haynes, who really focused on pilot reports, commercial pilots, military pilots, civilian pilots, he has the most organized collection. If you go to the Heritage Center in Laramie, you can pull his collection. And so I pulled November 11, 1975. There was a huge UFO wave reported by pilots from early October to November 11th. Many reports from credible witnesses leading up to Travis's return. So that, I think, leads a lot of credibility to Travis's case as well.
Yeah. It's the whole thing. I mean, it is so strange. That whole story is so strange in a very real way that it leads one to believe that, what's this, the saying, you can't make this crap up. That's exactly what goes through my mind when I think of that case. It's like, this is a story you just can't make up.
Right.
I mean, and the fact that it happened to somebody who was so very, the literal embodiment of Americana, blue collar, just down to earth, real people. And the experience, you had law enforcement questioning about, what did you guys do to him? These guys going, you don't understand. This is, we're trying to tell you we didn't do this. This is what happened. And then Travis coming back and, and he's like, yeah, this is what happened here.
Right.
And so, the realness of all of it, I think that's the thing that is very interesting about all of the high strangeness cases, is the realness of it all. Yeah. You have very, you, Trey, we're not extraordinary people in the sense that, if you look at our lives, you're a mom, we're just all everyday people in a sense, having a very not everyday life.
Yeah.
And when you use the terms my paranormal life, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, that's literally, the way it feels. It feels exactly that, my paranormal life. Going back from early on, and I feel like I said, we're just average people having a very unaverage life.
Right. On one hand, but there's commonalities between people that have paranormal lives and experiences. And there's been studies done, multiple studies. Dr. Leo has a great book, actually, through his psychology practice called Soul Samples, where he did many, many inventories on people claiming to have these experiences. And certain things keep popping up with these people. Now, there can be different reasons for this. It could be a lot of people that have these experiences are very creative types. I can't tell you how many musicians and artists and people that are really not dogmated thinkers, people that have very, they question, like my mom, for example, she questioned everything. She was very religious, but she changed religious like every other year. She was looking into something else, and she always questioned everything. And that's the one thing I did appreciate about my mom, because she just question. And you find that over and over again with so many of these people that have these experiences. And I think there's a reason for that. Now, it could be just that we have creative minds. And so, you know, if, like I said before, I really believe that we play a role in manifesting a lot of this. I think we're all manifestors. We're great manifestors. In fact, this might be one of the secrets that these secret societies keep so hidden. Because if we all knew the power of our own ability to manifest and to change reality, then we'd be living in a much different world. And yeah, there's an esoteric side to this too, and that can be seen as scary and dark to people as well. And you got to be careful if you delve into that whole side of things. But it plays a role in some of this for sure. So yeah, it's interesting that you say that we're not that, you know, we're kind of ordinary, but we're all special people. And I think that there are commonalities with a lot of these experiencers that we can sort of narrow down. And certainly a lot of these inventories that have been done have shown this. And, you know, the mental illness piece, like, oh my gosh, these people are all nuts. That's a very, very small sliver of it, you know. And I'm glad that's starting to get dispelled more and more, because I think that's making more and more people comfortable going, okay, so yeah, I had this experience and I can't quite explain it. And people are being more open to sharing that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wow. As I can't even believe that, well, we've covered so many things tonight, and it's good. I was hoping to be able to touch on quite a few subjects tonight with you. As we start to close out tonight, what is something that you would like to leave with us tonight for a closing thought?
A couple things, I suppose. First of all, thanks for having me back on. I enjoy talking to you. You have such a calming energy, and I love that. It can be a little, it can be a little hyper sometimes. So it's like, oh, okay, I can chill a little bit here. I'd like to leave that. One thing I'm passionate about is history and these historical cases. I have a passion for these cases of the 1970s. You mentioned Travis Walton. You know, I mentioned, you know, Carl Higdon in the medicine bow case. I think a lot of these older cases we can revisit and learn a lot from. The old Snippy case from 67. So much of what's out there today is so manipulated. I don't know what's real and what's not anymore, thanks to AI and all that. So don't forget about, you know, history and go back and revisit that. Secondly, as we talked a little bit about our intentions, and you know, this is a hard knocks life, and I hope everybody out there, it's a hard time right now. I feel it, like I feel like it's this very up and down kind of energy, you know. So I hope everybody fights to stay on the upside of things. So
Definitely so.
Definitely. Well, thanks for having me here. She's great back there. I appreciate her.
We all appreciate Pam and the work that she does. All of my mods do an amazing job. I appreciate each one of them. And each and every one of you that have joined us tonight. Katie, I would like to see you come back on at some point. Of course, I'm sure there's many, many things that we can go over through time. And as you update things, as experiences update, are we still doing it beyond Skinwalker Ranch? Is that still?
I haven't heard about season 4 yet. I'm waiting like everybody else, so I hope they continue it. And I'll tell you what, I'll come back on here. I'm hoping to unveil something at next year's Contact in the Desert, and it has to do with Roswell. So in the Denver Roswell body case that has to do with Brigadier General Arthur Exon, was rumored one of the alien bodies ended up in a mortuary outfit in Denver. So I've been looking into that for almost 4 years, and I've been to the Eisenhower archives, and I'm ready to roll that out. So I'd be happy to come back and tell you all about that amazing, fascinating case.
Roswell is a big deal, a very big deal. So I'd very much appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. We'll do that. We'll do that.
Let's plan that.
Okay.
Definitely. All right. I'm going to go on and close this out. If you will hang out for just a moment. And we will definitely hear back from you then.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Wow. Again, guys, I can never get enough of hearing Katie talking about her experiences, the different things that that she brings to the table has been just amazing as always. And I hope you guys, well, I know you all enjoyed it tonight. Your comments and questions have been absolutely amazing. So I appreciate you all for that. Don't forget, join Magical Journey podcast.com for all things Magical Journey, including magical merch, which is what sponsors this show. So yeah, definitely be with us there, and may your journey always be magical.
I've waited for so long to see when you come back to me. Through the wars and battles that were lost, we're born again, it's you and me. The rest is history. Past lives. Past lives. Did we dance together on different floors in 1500 or 1504? We must have been lovers, we must have been something in our past.